Ja, da vi klar for det nest siste foredraget på Israel-konferansen 2022. Hjertelig velkommen til dere som her på dagsbesøk I dag, som ikke har vært her tidligere. Vi skal nå få et gjensyn med Eyal Dror, som oberstløytnant I IDF. Dere hørte han I går, da han snakket om hvordan han hadde vært med å lede hjelpen til sivile syrere under borgerkrigen. Og han kunne fortelle om tusenvis av syrere som fikk medisinsk hjelp og humanitær hjelp på annen måte. I dag temaet Israels utfordringer på Nordfronten. Så med det, ta vel imot Eyal Dror.
Good morning again. Before we start, Conrad, I just want to share something with you and with you all. Yesterday evening was one of my most exciting evenings. I'm an Israeli. I fought for my country in the last 24/7 years, and I'm always excited hearing our national anthem, the Tikva. Hear it here yesterday with you. It was so exciting. So in the name of my friends that saw the short clip that I took yesterday, and they sending a lot of regards to all of you, I just want to say, Conrad, thank you, and thank you all for your support. It means a lot for us. Today we are going to speak about something else. Yeah, it is connected to what we spoke yesterday, but it is not about humanitarian aid. We are going to speak a little bit about the neighborhood, which we call the Middle East. I will be rude if I will say that another 40 minutes you will be expert to the Middle East. People wrote books and PhDs about what is happening here. I even cannot call myself an expert, although I have some experience. I will try to share some, let's call it some dishes, some knowledge, basic knowledge about this area, and of course, I would encourage you to learn more about it. So there is a couple of ways to divide the Middle East. If I'm an Israeli, I will maybe divide it for enemies and friends, countries that we have peace agreement with them as the state of Israel. By the way, of course, there is some difference between the peace agreement with Egypt or the Abraham Accords, which has been signed just last year, but from strategic way, it's important. If I want to take another look on the Middle East, it's about conflicts and disagreements on the Middle East. Some of you will think, because it's often seen in the media, that the most important conflict in the Middle East is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I want you to think twice. There is another conflict in the Middle East, a huge one, which leads to millions of casualties. It's, of course, the conflict between the Sunnah and the Shia, the two parts of the Islam. By the way, the Shia represented by Iran, we will speak about it today. Sunnah is represented by Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Of course, there is a lot of differences even between the Sunnah parts. But this is a conflict. The fighting between those countries led to millions of casualties. And by the way, there is another way to look at the Middle East. Let's see the Iranian regime, how they are looking on the Middle East. Now, is anyone here know Persian? Is anyone here know Persian? Yes? It's amazing. So you will be able to help us. I don't know a word in Persian. I don't know a word in Persian, but believe me, we will take 60 seconds to watch this Ayatollah speaking to his people. Try to hear the name. Of course, you will not understand everything. Try to hear the names of countries and organizations that he is mentioning. It will start, I think, after the 2-3 sentences, he will start to get to the point.
ایران نیست تنها. توی معدود جغرافیایی نیست. امروز هشت شعبی عراق ایرانه، حزب الله لبنان ایرانه، انصار الله یمن ایرانه، جبهه وطنی سوریه ایرانه، جهاد اسلامی فلسطین ایرانه، حماس فلسطین ایرانه. اینا همه شده ایران. یعنی ایران دیگه ما نیستیم دنا.
Have you succeeded to catch some countries and some organization? Yes. See how it looks like my first map. Iran is taking advantage on countries that call themselves Israel enemies. And they're using these countries, not their armies to fight against Israel. They built in these countries foreign forces, believed in the same religions that the Ayatollah believed, the Shia. By the way, he spoke about Ansarullah min Yaman. He spoke about Hezbollah al-Lubnani. Take a look how he said it. Hezbollah al-Lubnani, Irani. It means everything is connected to Iran. And by the way, if you want to see a little bit about Iran, another tip that I'm always saying, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. We are very proud of it. In countries that you cannot speak, in countries that you cannot criticize the regime, what left is to draw cartoons. In those countries, if you will speak against the regime, you literally disappear at night. So take a look at the two faces of Iran. By the way, there is one thing wrong in this cartoon. You can think what it is. I will ask it when I'll complete to explain it. Two faces of Iran. The first is the president of Iran, Rouhani. And he's sharing peace and love with the world. By the way, speaking with the world, I'm speaking about the Western world, the democracy countries, Europe, the US. They want always peace. They want always love. Unfortunately, there is just one problem with this. The president of Iran has zero ability to take any response or any decision. The person who takes it is their supreme leader, Khamenei. By the way, yesterday I told you what is the meaning of fatwa, if you remember, an Islamic court of law decision. So take a look at his fatwa about the nuclear weapon. By the way, the only thing that is not correct in this picture, because it was drawn 2019, is that Mr. Rouhani was too much liberal for the Iranian regime. So what they have done, by democracy elections, they exchange him. When I'm speaking about democracy election, he just won, is the person that exchanged him. By the way, he's looking exactly like Khamenei. He won 85% of the voices. And you can all agree with me, this is not a kind of democracy that we want. But from the ideology of burning the Middle East, fighting against Israel, you must have a person that know how to do so. It is not just by thoughts. You need a person of action. This guy was Qasem Soleimani. Without getting involved in any kinds of politics, it is not my expertise and it is not my job. As a person living in the Middle East, I will just say that he was assassinated 2 years ago. Thousands, if not 10,000s of human beings are still alive because he is not. He was responsible for the death of millions. By the way, the minority are Jews or Christians. The majority are Muslims. By the way, you don't have to believe me. Go and ask the citizens of Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. He was the person that connected all the dots for the Iranian regime in the area across. And he built what we call the Shiite militias, the Shiite forces, armed forces, in order to fight against Israel and against other countries which we will speak about. And now let's start. Iran is far away, 1,500 kilometers from Israel. In every speech, they swear to destroy us. From 1,500 kilometers, it's pretty hard to destroy a country. You need to have a nuclear war weapon or a very sophisticated one. Unfortunately, for the Iranians, Israel has better technologies. And they know that if they will shoot us, we know how to intercept it. So what the Iranian is trying to do in order to come closer, they're taking advantages on countries. They're taking advantages on people in order to build what we can call the Shiite axis. And now you will see a mess, and I will explain this mess exactly. They are looking over countries or people that believe with the same belief that they are believed in order to come closer to Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. But I don't want that you will think that Israel is the only problem. I will show you later on how Israel is not the only problem of the Iranian regime. And I want to start with Lebanon. Let's speak a little bit about Lebanon. I call it the tragedy of Lebanon. This guy is responsible for the tragedy of Lebanon. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this guy, Hassan Nasrallah. You remember that I told you, take a look carefully in the Middle East of cartoons. Take a look at this cartoon. This guy, Hassan Nasrallah, which, by the way, is almost looking like the same, is dressing the same way like Rouhani was dressing. And take a look what is written in Arabic. It is written in Lubnani Fakhur. It means, I'm a proud Lebanese. And he always speaking to the Lebanese people, I'm like you, I'm a proud Lebanese. My role was to defend Lebanon from the IDF, from those terrible Israelis, by the help of Iran. And you can see it with here, which is a nice one. He built an organization, a military organization named Hezbollah, which, by the way, is recognized by a lot of countries as a terror organization. Hezbollah has 150,000 missiles. 150,000 missiles. It's more missiles that some of the European armies have. By the way, Hezbollah is not the formal army of Lebanon. Lebanon as a country has its own army. Are you familiar with a country, another country that have two different armies, and one of it, informal army, is stronger than the army of the state? When I said that the tragedy of Lebanon, Hezbollah led Lebanon for a totally collapsement. I'm sure that most of you saw this one. There is sad movies about this explosion, which literally erased 90% of the flour storage of Lebanon. By the way, the economy of Lebanon before 2020 wasn't such a big deal. But after this, it was collapsed. It was collapsed because the world will not help Lebanon while Hezbollah is taking a part of the government. It collapsed because Hezbollah used the port of Lebanon, an international port, in order to hide explosions. Can you accept something like this? By the way, I'm not an expert for international law, but using civilians' facilities in order to hide weapons, it's against all kinds of law. He led Hezbollah to a situation that people waiting hours for diesel fuel. He led Lebanon, for a situation that people do not have nothing to buy in the supermarkets. They are living in darkness. You remember we spoke yesterday about Syria. He led Lebanon to a situation that if I'm an average Lebanese and I'm having a work, getting my salary, I will be able within my payment for a 1 month pay, I will be able to buy just 10 dishes of shawarma. I don't know if you are familiar with this delicious food. This is a food that we love in the Middle East. It's a piece of bread with some meat. If I'm an average Lebanese, I will be able to buy with my salary 10 dishes from this, and I will not have money for anything else. This is the situation of Lebanon. The Lebanese know it. The Lebanese start to protest it against Hezbollah. Unfortunately, Hezbollah in these days is too strong. A couple of words about Hezbollah. We spoke about an army in a country. So Hezbollah, for example, in 2006, decided to open a war against Israel. As much as I know, and again, I'm not an expert for diplomacy, but the decision of opening a war against another country, it's a decision that the country, the government, the president should take. Hezbollah decided to kidnap 2 Israeli soldiers in 2006. He entered Israel, he murdered a couple of Israeli soldiers, and he kidnapped another 2. It led to one of the most tragic wars that we have, 50 and some days of war with Lebanon. The people of Lebanon didn't want this war. The country, the government of Lebanon didn't want this war. The Lebanese army didn't want this war. But Hezbollah decided. Why? Because the Iranians paying the money. And they said to him, do so. After 50 and some days, the war ended. The war ended with the decision of the UN. It's called 1701. One of the most important notes of it is that Hezbollah will not be able to have presence on the southern part of Lebanon, the border between Israel and Lebanon. And of course, Hassan Nasrallah, who was blamed by the Lebanese for the damage he caused his country, said, okay, we are with you. We are the protectors of Lebanon. We will not be there anymore. He just didn't tell them that since that day, for 13 years, they digged six tunnels sponsored by Iranian regime. And a short question. In Iran, people, human beings, residents of Iran, living without the ability to have clean water. People starving to death. In Lebanon, people you saw don't have money to buy fuel. Why you are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in a project of digging 6 tunnels, and it is on a rock, it's a inside mountains. This is the topographic of the Israeli-Lebanese border. It's approximately 80 meters down the ground, 1 kilometer length, and its exits are in Israel, in 6 places. But hey, I could have got it if the entrance or the exits of these tunnels were to IDF bases, because we are enemies. You call yourself an army, we are an army, let's fight together. I cannot accept that they are digging those tunnels and the exits were next to Israelis' villages. This was the purpose for the next war. Hundreds, fortunately, of course, we have good intelligence and we succeeded to find those tunnels and blocked it. Hundreds of millions of dollars were invested by Iran in this project. And last word about Hezbollah, which is very funny, ridiculous, and sees who we are fighting with. In one of the days, Israel, after we exposed those tunnels, we asked the UN and we told them, you know that Hezbollah is using civilian facilities in order to dig those tunnels. Again, it's against the international law. And we even gave them the location of one building. By the way, you can see the fence, the wall between Israel and Lebanon. So we said to him, in this area, they are digging. What Hezbollah said, the Israelis are lying. He brought some media people and made them a tour inside his home. And no hole, no tunnel has been found. And they did a press meeting. You see how the Israelis is lying? Unfortunately for Hezbollah, when we put some cement, a lot of cement, in Israel, in the hole, and it flew under the tunnel, and you can see it here. They were running for their lives. They were running for their lives, but Israel is lying. Hundreds of millions of dollars Iran is spending on Hezbollah. But when they understand that it is not enough, they found another countries that they can share with them the same hate to Israel. They found Syria. By the way, in Syria, it's a ridiculous situation. While the minority, which called the Alawat, the Assad regime, which is a small part of the Shiite, is controlling most of the population, which is Sunnah. You saw those pictures yesterday, a terrible civil war. How Iran is connected? Well, it was two main players that kept Assad on its regime. First were the Russian. By the way, they were the second because they entered the arena in the end of 2015. The first were Iran. When Iran understood that Assad is going to fall and the Sunnah will control the country, they say, no, it's not okay from us. It will cut our Shiite way to Lebanon. And they send Qasem Soleimani, and they say that those people of Hezbollah, and they established the Shiite militias in Syria. When the war almost ended, when most of the areas of Syria has been reconquered again, Iran didn't left the country. As much as I know, if we are colleagues and you are helping me with a fight against my enemy, if the job is done, go back to your country. The Iranians say no. You remember the cartoons. The Iranians understood that they have an ability to take another front in order to fight against Israel. And to see here, those are the flags of the Shiite militias with the Syrian army. They are very well involved. The Iranian, with the assistance of Hezbollah, which is a very interesting question because Hezbollah is the protector of Lebanon. Why do they have to be in Syria? The answer is very known. If I pay you, you will go wherever I will say to you to go. And if not, you will not get any money from me. So Hezbollah is building in the last years, and this is something that makes us very concerned, the Israelis. Told you before that today in the reserve, I'm an officer in the Bashan division, which protecting the Israeli-Syrian border. So we are seeing those procedures in the last 4 years. Hezbollah built 2 units in Syria. Again, Hezbollah people from Lebanon built units in Syria. One of them is called the Southern Command. And it's a division to build the Syrian force. They're training them, they're sponsoring them, giving them advices, bringing them new weapons, teaching them tactics. It's not because they want that the Syrian army will be able to fight against the rebels. It's because they want that the Syrian army will be strong again like it was before the war in order to fight against Israel. And something that was even more concerned is an operational unit. It was a very, very classified secret until 2019. It calls the Golan Heights file. I can tell you today that this unit was aimed also my unit. So when we were trying to do our humanitarian aid operation, there was some days that we knew that we cannot do it, or we must have changed location because of this unit. This unit is a tactical unit that its mission is to make terrorist attacks against the state of Israel on the Syrian border. Lebanese that will make attacks against Israel from the Syrian border. By the way, the Assad regime didn't have any knowledge about it. It was a secret unit that Iran was built in Syria, operated by the Lebanese people of Hezbollah, and the Assad regime wasn't informed on it. See how ridiculous it is? Remember that yesterday I showed you the story of the field clinic that was behind the fence, if you remember so. It was here. A year and a half ago, Iranians people, They are not Iranians. They were operated by Iranian. They have arrived this area because it's very close to the fence, and they put these devices in order to exploit it on Israeli soldiers. Do you want to see how it was look like? It was published by the IDF. You can see the terrorists, and yeah, I will call them, of course, terrorists. They are hiding. In a second, you will be able to see here the security fence. This is the place that the clinic was operated. They are putting the device and they are escaping, hiding, and then 1, 2, 3, and they eliminated. Thanks God we had the intelligence to see them. If not, a couple of Israeli soldiers will lost their lives. This is how Iran is operating Syria, and I don't have to remind you that in Syria, every day, people are dying. People do not have hospitals and clinics. People do not have water. People do not have any electricity. Shouldn't they take these hundreds of millions of dollars and help those human beings who have suffered for 12 years from the war? Shouldn't this will be the way? By the way, we can continue and speak about Iraq and speaking about how misunderstanding the Middle East mentality was raising also Al-Qaeda. I will just say in 2 words that what happened in Iraq in 2003 led to the Shia government in Iraq. If you remember, until 2003, Iraq was controlled by a Sunnah, Saddam Hussein. When the American entered Iraq, it was a change, and the Shia, which are the majority, took the government. By the way, when speaking about Shiite, it is immediately they got support from Iran, and Iran immediately started to build another force in Iraq, calling themselves the Shiite militias. They are looking like this. You can see that the flags are almost in the same flags of Hezbollah, the same colors of Hezbollah, the same ideology of Hezbollah. This guy, Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, which was the commander of this operative unit, was assassinated with Qasem Soleimani. He was the person that came to take Soleimani from the airport. So you understand that they didn't met in order to speak about a new book, okay? So building the Shiite militias in Iraq, and it is not just against Israel, because the people of those militia Shias are attacking now the Americans' presence in Iraq. But because they are getting paid, they will go to Syria, they will be sent to Lebanon. Of course, there is some information that I cannot share with you, but we know it, that, again, when I'm paying you your money, you will do whatever I need to do. Every guy of them is getting between $50 to $100 a month, and he will fight for Iran. I will ask again, if you will put this $50 to $100 for your citizens, for your civilians, they will not have better lives. We can continue with Gaza, which is a little bit strange because Gaza, Hamas, and the Islamic jihadists believe in Sunnah, not in the Shia. But when you have a mutual enemy, so sometimes the ideology is not changing. You can see by this picture of Soleimani, it was taken in Gaza 2 years ago, and they are building their forces in order to fight against Israel. However, I told you that Israel is not the problem. Israel is not the problem. We just discussed about all of it. Israel is not the problem because Iran problem, not the Iranian people problem. The Iranian regime problem is against all of us. It's against people who believe in democracy. It's against people who believe in the values of life or freedom of speech, or to freedom to love people from my same background, men with women, men with men, women with women. You know that if you will be belonging to the LGBTQ in Iran, you will be hanging to death. They are fighting, they are challenging those values. Israel is just the excuse. Israel is just because it's close and is located, our location is with Arab countries around all of us. It will be a little bit harder for them to destroy the United States of America, for example, but if you don't hate them, why are you calling them the big devil? You're calling us the small devil, and I can accept we are enemies. But if I'm your only problem, why you are calling the US the big devil? Why you are speaking against democratic values? Why you are attacking Saudi Arabia? And why you are giving the Shiite militias in Yemen, which call Houthis, to attack Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates? You know why? Because in their perspective, when Saudi Arabia is having connections with US, they are Westerns. When the UAE signing the Abraham Accords, they are traitors in the Islam. They are against everything and everyone who is against, who is not believing in their ideology. You can see it. This was taken from Yemen. Houthis attack against the new government that was sponsored and supported by the Saudi people. And if you will take a look on the flag of Ansarullah, the Houthis, the Shiite presence in Yemen, and I will read it to you, you will understand that Israel is not a problem, because what they are writing is Allahu Akbar, God is great. El-Mot l'America. El-Mot l'America. Death to America. Just after it, El-Mot l'Israel, a death to Israel. El-La'na al-Yahud, curse on all the Jews, and Al-Nasr lil-Islam, the victories for the Islam. But if Israel was their only problem, why should they call El-Mot l'America? And why should they send their bombs all over the UAE and Bahrain? When they are doing this, when they are bombing Saudi Arabia and the oil supply has been stopped for a couple of days, all of us are losing from it. So unfortunately, not like yesterday, I don't have much positive messages about it. This is the Middle East. It will be stayed here. The Iranian regime, and I will add, unfortunately, will here to stay. They are thinking 50 and 100 years ahead, not like us, who are thinking what will be tomorrow. They are thinking they have their strategic plan for 50 and 100 years, and they are moving it slowly by slowly, cheating the world, hiding from the world, using the money, not for the civilians, using for their own interests in order to continue to build the Shia power, the Shiite militias all over the world. The only thing that I can share an optimistic message that Israel is here to stay. And although they want that we will disappear, we will not. And I will say in my humble way, that Israel today is protecting the modern world, the democratic world. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Eyal, and for all your service. We have time for one or two questions. Tobias is on his way. Be quick.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I have a question regarding funding. Since, as you mentioned, the salaries for the Hezbollah fighters aren't that large, with all due respect, and the Hezbollah has recently been sanctioned in a lot of EU countries, and their funding capabilities has been heavily reduced. We are now seeing Hezbollah moving into more illicit industries like the drug trades, weapon trades. They have agents all over in Venezuela infiltrating the drug trades, to earn money, to continue their fight against Israel. So my question is, how can we, as a prominent civil society here in Norway, lay pressure on the Norwegian government and to inform all our other fellow peers in Norway? How can we strangle the financial strength of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations that is using EU funding and also illicit drugs money to funnel back to continue their war? Since from what I've got from the message is that if you have enough cash, you can pay the fighters to do pretty much whatever you want. So we need to strangle the funding in order to reduce the violence in the Middle East.
So thank you for the question. I can just mention that during the last years that it was sanctions on Iran, we saw how the budget sponsoring the terror was decreased. It is well-known fact. We heard the voices of Hezbollah warriors that said, okay, should I risk my life just for $100, not for $500 like it was used to be? So sanctions is working. My claim is that we must do the sanction harder and harder. By the way, if I had just one thought that those sanctions will hurt the civilians, I would say no. We should take the risk because civilians is above all. I know that this money is not going for the civilians. Yeah, the Iranian regime, the Lebanese, Hezbollah, they will claim this is because of our citizens. It's the same happening in Gaza. The money for the rehabilitation, 10% of it is reaching to the civilians, 90% goes for the tunnels. We must continue with the sanction. We must fight against bank accounts, illegal companies. They know the work. They know how to hide the money. There is a lot of experts that know better than myself how to do it, but they are opening companies and. I think this is one of the most important struggling against those financial. Hezbollah is leading the world in the drugs issue in South America, in Jordan, in Syria. So this is the thing that the world should fight strongly without second thought about it.
I mean, from Norway, things can look kind of easy. And I used to think many years ago that maybe just like the global warming is a big problem, maybe it's a part of the solution. Because when oil runs out of value and it's nothing left, maybe that's when there will be peace in the Middle East. And as long as oil has a value, then the war will go on.
I don't have any smart answer, but unfortunately I just do claim that with oil or without oil, they will continue to do their best in order to hit us. And when you are putting 24/7 of your day and life to think creatively, how can I harm a person? So you will find a way, although you will not have the oil, for example. So they are dedicating their life, literally dedicating their life to find ways to hurt Israel. So I don't think that if the oil will disappear, it will be the solution.
No, but it will decrease the threat with all that money disappearing.
Maybe.
Yeah, Patricia, please.
Eyal, thank you for your presentation. Is there any hope that the Iranian civilian society would take over at a certain point? Because we see in the figures that, for example, the birth rate in Iran is very low. They don't make any kids anymore because of their situation. So how long can a regime stay in place?
So I think the Iranians people tried a couple of times in the last years to demonstrate the Iranian regime. They also tried to do like a minor revolution against the regime. Unfortunately, in a country that do not obey our rules, and when you cut the internet as first stage because you don't want that anyone in the world will see what is really happening, and when you're putting your money in your security forces because you are preparing yourself in the last 50 days for these days to happen, it's very hard to protest. I will add one more thing. As long as the countries, and this is my opinion and my only opinion, of course, I'm not representing here a message from a country, or as long as the people living in the West, in democratic countries, as long as their governments will allow to these brutal regimes to survive, I cannot see any hope for the Iranians. They brutalized, murdered them. In the first minute they are starting to protest, they are sending their security forces, and we saw it a couple of times in the last years. Without help and without involvement, they will not be able to do so. This is what I think, and of course there is a lot of interests, and I'm speaking as a person, for myself who saw what happened in Syria. It's tragic to see how the world is keeping silent while war crimes is happening, and focus all of its criticism about one country. By the way, the only country that believe in democracy in the Middle East, and I'm sure that you all know about which country I'm speaking.
Last question. Sorry about that, Sigurd.
I don't know how well you are into Islam and its thinking. There is an idea of waqf, in which this thought is that anything which is conquered or given to Islam, that is to Allah, can never be given back. As I see it, I don't know too much about Islam, but is my perception correct that this idea of waqf is the main reason for these Muslim countries to get rid of Israel?
When they are speaking about the Islam, when they are speaking about their land, it's a negotiation that you can always say who were here before, the Jews or the Muslims. Yeah, I can agree with you that about their thinking that this was our land, and they are always, it was a very interesting question, why do Muslims support Al-Qaeda or ISIS, for example? And it was because they glorified the days of before 1,000 years when the Islamic Republican was very, very big. So ideology, of course, this is their thinking, but we are now living here, and if there is a country that is still thinking that they can live like they were used to live 1,500 years ago, I'm sorry, I cannot accept it. If they say that they can destroy a country because different ideology, I cannot accept it. And I will just mention that, yes, they're trying to destroy Israel, but on the way, they are destroying the world. They are destroying the Middle East.
This is the underlying idea, the basic of their thinking.
Okay, so if all of the world is... I'm totally with you. If the world can accept it, so we will continue to fight each other. I think that it must be a line that said, okay, it was the history, there was the ideology, there was the Islam, there is the Waqf, but we are now living here in these days. Do you still want that we will all fight each other until the rest of our days? Israel will not disappear. Iran will not disappear. The only solution is to try to live together. You will stay in your land, we will stay in our land, and we will all try to live and to give better future for our children. By the way, I can tell you that our children have a great future. Although we are fighting and although there are terror attacks, the children of Iraq, children of Yemen, children of Iran, I'm not so positive about their future. Thank you very much again.
Thanks a lot. Da tar vi en